All right, welcome class. Again, I apologize for not being there with you guys, but I will be on jury duty for one more day, so I should be back on Friday. Remember, if you do have any questions that you can't get answered in class, please feel free to see Mr. Goodman or Miss Busker at the end of the hall. They both teach algebra, and I've talked to them, and they are definitely willing to help you, okay? I just wanted to go over a few things about the Chapter 5 test, just to kind of give you some specifics. I know, again, I haven't been able to be there this week, but I'm going to try to kind of give you a little bit of heads up. So first of all, the test obviously will be on Thursday, okay? And there are 21 questions on the test. Of those 21 questions, the only ones that you have to graph are inequalities, okay? So inequalities are the only ones you have to graph. None of the systems of equations are you forced to graph like how you guys did on the quiz. So just inequalities where you have to shade. Then there are 4-story problems, kind of like what you saw on the quiz, where you have to give a system and then solve it by one of your methods, okay? So today we're going to be kind of just looking at some review, getting ready for the test on Thursday. Now, you do not have this paper in front of you, but hopefully the sub will put it up in just a few minutes. And so what I've done is created kind of just 10 problems here that I wanted you to take a few minutes in class and kind of work out, and then that way we can go over them and see how you're doing. So if you could go ahead and pause the video at this point and give the class some time to work on these 10 minutes. I don't know exactly how long it'll take, but go ahead and let them work. And then when you think just about everybody's done, go ahead and start up the video again, and I'm going to go over how to work them out. Okay, hopefully you have worked all these out. So what I'm going to do is quickly tell you the answers, and then after I tell you the answers, I'll kind of get you started on how to solve them. And if everybody's feeling really comfortable, please feel free to direct the sub that they may fast forward through this part of the video. So number 1, it came out to be 1, -1. Number 2 came out to be many solutions. 3 was 4, 5. 4 was no solution. And 5 was 2, -8. Okay? Now remember, in these sections from 5.1 to 5.4, we had been going over all those different methods. So you have graphing, you have substitution, you have elimination, and you have a matrix. You can use any one of those methods on the test. But remember, those methods are not going to help you necessarily on numbers 2 and number 4. So on 2 and 4, you definitely have to think about how you're going to solve those. So if everyone feels comfortable and you want to fast forward, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm going to quickly kind of show you what I would do. I apologize if I was there in class with you. I definitely would be asking for your feedback, okay? So on number 1, I would go ahead and do substitution because this is the way it's sitting. So I would just substitute out that y value for the quantity above it. And then notice now I have a problem that just involves x's. So if I go ahead and distribute, now I can solve this for x. So if I combine my x's, remember those are on the same side, so we just combine. And if we move this 6 to the other side, now if we divide it off, we get our x value. Once we have our x value, we can just plug it back in, and that's how we get our y value. Okay? Now, number 2, we already know the answer, but in number 2, the way this is sitting, because this one's almost alone, I almost think I would just divide off the 3. I can move this over, and then I can have them lined up, but notice none of them are opposite of each other. So I think I would probably just divide everything by 3. Oops. And by dividing everything by 3, if you notice, I have gotten the y alone. Once I have this y alone, I can take my quantity and I can replace it again in for my variable, okay? So if I go ahead and do that, I'm just going to do a substitution. So instead of putting the y, I'm going to put my quantity. Oops, that's a 32. And now I have to distribute. If you notice, my variables are going to cancel each other out. So I can either leave the 32 on this side or I can move it to the other side. So if you want to leave it, you'll get 32 is equal to 32, which is a true statement. Or if you want to move the 32 over, you would get 0 is equal to 0. Either way, you have a true statement, which means that these lines are on top of each other. So they're right on top, so they have many solutions in common. Remember, when I was there, we talked about you don't want to say all real numbers because, what it actually means is that the lines are on top of each other. So it means every single point is a solution that's on the line. The point over here is not a solution. The point over here is not a solution. So it is not all real numbers, okay? So you just want to make sure and be very careful on that, okay? All right, number 3. If I was doing number 3, I actually think I would use a matrix on this. And if you notice, this is an old calculator that I have at home. Notice this 83 actually has a matrix key right there. So it's not a second feature. So you have to kind of just know your calculator. So if I go over to edit and I type in my coefficients, so I've got my coefficients typed in for A. I'm going to go to matrix B, and I'm going to type in my numbers on the side here. This one's really kind of lined up very nicely for it. I'm going to go to a blank screen. Now I'm going to call up matrix A, inverse matrix B. And there I've got my answer. Now remember, there's lots of different ways that you can solve these. Just this particular problem, if you don't use a matrix, you're either going to have to solve for one of the variables, which is going to be a little bit of work, or you're going to have to multiply both the top and the bottom by a number to get them to be the same. So this is quite a bit of work if you don't use the matrix. Okay, going over here to number 4. So on number 4, definitely looks like a good matrix one again. And if I can just show you quickly, remember we tried this one in class before, and you're going to notice it's going to give you an error message. And remember, the error message for no solution and many solution is exactly the same. So when I work it out here, notice it's giving me that singular matrix message. So if we see that on the test, then we know it's going to be one of our 2 special cases. So now we talked about either looking at the slope, looking at the intercepts. We talked about getting them into y equals. So why don't I do that? Why don't I get them into y equals? So I'm going to take this first one and just solve it for y. I believe that was a -3, or yeah, it was a +3x. When I used my pen there, I couldn't see what it became. So now I have to divide by -6. So that's going to be 3/2 plus 1/2 x. Okay, so that's just getting it into y equals. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the second equation. I'm just moving the 5x over. Now I'm going to divide by 10. So I have a 1 plus 1/2 x. And if you notice right here, this is my slope, which means they're definitely parallel. And when I look at my intercept, this is technically a 1.5. So if we were to graph it, like if we were to go up here to the graph, this one would start at 1 and the other one would start just above it. There wouldn't be much space, but the one would be higher, which means we'd have no solution. Okay, the last one I really like, because if you look at this last one, do you see how the -2 and the +2, those are opposite of each other. So this is perfect for the elimination method. So if we try elimination here, we're going to get 14x. Notice this will cancel. And then 34 plus -6 is 28. And then if we divide off the 14, we get x to be 2. Now the only thing that's bad about this one is trying to get your y value. There's no good equation to plug it back into. You just have to kind of pick. I probably might pick this one just to stay away from the 34. So if I plug the 2 in for x, I'm just using the second equation. You can use whichever one you want. I have 10, and now I have to solve it for y. So if I move the 10 over, and then if I divide off the 2, that's how we got the negative 8. So there's not a fast method for that. That does kind of take a little bit of time. Okay? All right. Numbers 6, 7, and 8. So if you fast forwarded through the other problems, if you want to listen real quick to the answers on 6, 7, and 8, number 6 came out to be negative 7, comma, negative 16. Number 7 worked out to be negative 5, comma, 4. And number 8 actually had two answers of 13, 18, and 1, comma, 6. Now remember, this was the stuff that we did Friday last week. This is called a literal equation. Really what you have is you have an equation on this side, and then you have the equation on that side. Well, if really, you could type these into your graphing calculator under the y equals. You could just type them in separate, and then tell it to graph. And then we could do the intersection. Now notice the intersection is probably off our screen, so we may have to adjust it, or sometimes it'll still give it to you. So yep, it's still giving it to me even if it's off my screen. But if it is off my screen, we can always go to zoom, and then we can go to out. So if we do zoom out, and I hit enter, notice it will adjust it for me, probably so that I can see it better. So now I can see it cross. If you do end up playing around with the zoom, always just go back to zoom standard. Mine is number 6. That'll put your graph back to a nice, comfortable 10 by 10. Okay, so it's just under the zoom key there. Zoom standard puts it back to a nice normal graph. I personally, though, think this one's easier just to solve by hand. So if you subtract the 2x and then you move the 5, notice you get the negative 7 really quick. So I really don't know that that's worth plugging it into your calculator. Then you can plug it into either side, the left or the right. Okay? All right, number 7. I showed you guys both how to do this by the graphing calculator and by hand.